It's not racist, though, is it?
Look, you know them when you see them. I know racism when I see it. This is pure bigotry, anti-immigrant, racist propaganda. It is based on racism. It peddles racism. It panders to racism. Yes, all the way. I watch it all the time, and it makes me sick because I know the extraordinary contribution that the immigrants have made to this country.
First things first, if you haven't subscribed, make sure you do so. And comment, let me know what you think of the video. Last week, a row broke out between Michael Heseltine and the Reform Party, Nigel Farage in particular, because Michael Heseltine has been abundantly clear about his feelings on the racism which exists within that party and the mess that it's got us into. In Michael Heseltine's view, it is clear that he believes that the racism is stopping us examining Brexit, and also the racism is actually what caused Brexit, because the racism and xenophobia which exploded since 2016 in particular has left this country in a very difficult spot. But, of course, if you agree with Nigel Farage, then you're going to be on the defensive. And some people watching this video may agree with Nigel Farage. I actually happen to agree with Michael Heseltine. Anyway, I just want to highlight these clips, and I think that Heseltine's interview on Talk TV didn't get many views, and it's interesting. His opinion, to me, is always interesting, and it's good for everyone to hear it.
It's racism. So reform of racists, Nigel.
Yeah, I've heard that from Heseltine time and time again. By the way, I thought he'd finally been put out to grass, but clearly not. He is, of course, a fanatical pro-European, fanatical globalist. If he's in my personal company, he sort of physically has to... I mean, he literally
can't... Does he speak to you or not?
No, not really. Not really. I mean, I have done some debates with him head to head. He's filled with bile, hatred, intolerance. He's a proper full-on modern-day liberal. He can't accept that anybody else has a different view. So rather than saying, well, you know what, I've got a different point of view, he sinks to abuse. He's been doing it over and over with UKIP, with me, year after year.
I wonder whether he does it so much that people still listen.
He's an old bore.
OK.
What is worth listening to, though, is your thoughts on the chances of the Conservatives turning around this extraordinary... I mean, regardless of what... I'm fully aware of your views of Mr Johnson as well, a former Prime Minister, but nonetheless, he came back with an 80-seat majority. It was widely thought at the time it's impossible to overturn that. That's Boris guaranteed, not for one, but certainly 2 terms. Since then, we've had more Prime Ministers than I can remember. All sorts of things have happened. Scotland has fallen apart in favour of the SNP, so Labour then get a stronghold in there. And now we are against that prediction that this could never be overturned, looking at the possibility of a landslide victory for Labour bigger than the 170 that Mr Blair got in 1997. Do you believe that is the only possible outcome to this election?
Well, one has to recognise that the polls historically are pretty accurate. That's not to say that a campaign can't influence the polls, but in my long experience of electioneering, there is always only one issue, and that is the measurement in people's judgment of how well off they're doing.
Correct, yeah.
And it comes down to one of 2 arguments. If they're not feeling well off, then it's time for a change. If they are feeling one off, then they will vote along the lines of the government on the basis we don't want someone coming in and mucking it all up.
Yeah.
And it always comes back to that. And if you have any doubts, just look at Keir Starmer's opening salvo. It is all about the word change. And, of course, this is the oldest political trick in the business. Avoid telling people what you're going to do, but promise them a change. And that, of course, takes us back to the elephant in the room, which is Brexit, because the Brexit referendum was conducted on exactly that. that you're frustrated. There are lots of things you don't like. You hate the immigrants. So we must take control of our country, for God's sake, whatever that meant. And people voted for it. They had no idea what they were voting for. They just wanted change. And so now we are facing a general election. And once again, the elephant in the room is Brexit. That this is going to be the most dishonest election campaign I can ever remember, because both big parties are going to avoid the fundamental dilemma facing this country. What sort of country are we in the politics of tomorrow? Do we matter? How do we influence? How are we regarded? What's the best interest to our economy? How do we defend ourselves? And none of those questions can be answered credibly unless you talk about our position in Europe. But that is a forbidden subject because of the toxic influence of Nigel Farage and the Reform Party, who are racialists, if they're anything, pandering to public resentment about immigration. But so, because there are votes in that, nobody will address the fundamental issues of what we should do about our European relationship.
It's a little strong, though, to suggest that Reform are a racist party, surely. I mean, they have a belief that the UK can survive outside Europe. They've got policies they'd like to implement on immigration. It might be robust, it might be different, it might be genuine change. It's not racist, though, is it?
Look, you know them when you see them. I know racism when I see it. This is pure bigotry, anti-immigrant, racist propaganda. That's what it's all about. And the whole psychology of their campaign is to reinforce those very unattractive human instincts.
Well, how do we ever talk about immigration in that respect? If that is the accusation that you would put to anybody that has a belief in controlling immigration, which is out of control, yes, I think you would agree with that. Channel crossings are unacceptable. Numbers are very high.
It's not out of control. Why have we got high levels of immigration? Well, let's look at the figures. The fact is that our universities are a honeypot for talented young people to come and take advantage of the quality of our universities. And some of them bring their families with them. Now, okay, let's cut all that. So that means that our universities are desperately short of money and will have to reduce the scale of their operation. Perhaps that's what you want. Let's look at the health service. Let's look at any public provision you want to talk about. You will find today they are supported by immigrants. Okay, send them all home. And what are you going to do to look after the elderly and the sick and the people who are dependent on the public sector? You tell me, because Reform won't tell you that.
I agree. I agree. You're absolutely right. There is a clear issue there, and that's what they are the stories of legal immigration. What I think is a problem for many people is what is seen as illegal immigration. 50,000 people a year rowing across the Channel. You wouldn't suggest that's okay, Mr. Hesseltine?
I'm sorry. That is a tiny proportion of the whole.
Every year.
The figures, oh yes, we're talking about 700,000 legal immigrants against perhaps 40 or 50,000 people coming across the Channel. And okay, let's assume it was all about.
That's a lot of people, and over 3 or 4 years, you start to get to the 500,000.
I'm sorry. Yeah, that is not what Reform is all about. They are about the fact that there are lots of coloured people in this country who engender a degree of resentment and anxiety, and the Reform panders to that. Let's not muck about by these people. That's what they have done. That's what they are doing. That's what they believe. And the time has come when the democratic process in this country takes these people on and calls them for what they are. But let's just go back to the main issue, which is the boat people. Now, the French are our neighbours, and they have nearly 4 times as many immigrants coming illegally into France as come across the Channel here. So self-evidently, this is not just a British problem, it is a French-British problem. And actually, if you look at Greece and Italy, it's a European
Germany,
problem.
You're right. I mean, that side of it is an EU-wide problem.
Let's talk about how we cooperate with Europe in order to control this European problem. But how do you do that? if you're telling people you should take back control, we get our country back again, and all that sort of platitudinous rubbish. So the only solution is actually to coordinate the European approach and adopt a sort of Marshall Plan so that we can do deals with the countries from which the immigrants are coming to help them recreate the conditions that the young entrepreneurs that actually the immigrants are stay in their own countries. That's the only coherent policy.
I mean, we haven't got long, but I'll come back to Brexit in a second. But just to clarify something, you use the word coloured, and I know to many people that would be a very old-fashioned term and not really relevant these days or even kind these days. But I understand what you were trying to say. The Reform are essentially a racist party. Are you saying that all the people that are listening and watching this now, Michael Heseltine, are therefore, by extension, racist because they might want to vote for something different and not the old two-party system, career politicians, same old, same old? Every one of them is a racist.
I never said that. I said the party is based on racism. It peddles racism. It panders to racism. Yes, all the way. I watch it all the time, and it makes me sick because I know the extraordinary contribution that the immigrants have made to this country ever since Enoch Powell, as Health Secretary, began to encourage them to come here in order to sustain the health service, which the indigenous population were not prepared to do. I've lived through all of this. I know what it's about, and I'm not prepared to pander to the reformist language in order to avoid the truth.
But there could be reform that actually scupper at least some of the Conservatives' chances at the ballot box.
Undoubtedly. They just did in the West Midlands, where an absolute first-class mayor, Andy Street, lost by 1,500 votes when 35,000 voted for reform. And they should be ashamed of themselves.
On that point, Michael Hesseltine, thank you. He is Lord Heseltine, former Conservative Deputy Prime Minister. I can see people pulling over in their cars. I can hear tea being spat out. I can hear folk passing out with the shock at some of what you might have just concluded was a very unfair assessment of an entire political party.
It's clear Talk TV think it's shocking that Michael Heseltine made these comments about the Reform Party being racist. In my view, I think it's shocking that Talk TV are prepared to defend racism and xenophobia that exists within the Reform Party and certainly large amounts of the Conservative Party. And I hope that after this election is over and we hopefully have a change of government, that there is a return to normality and racism and extremism is put back where it belongs. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to comment, and as I said earlier, if you haven't subscribed, subscribe.